In the shadowed halls of Merryweather Hall, a blood-stained box hidden behind a velvet curtain unravels a deadly secret. Miss Jane Marple, with her gentle demeanor and razor-sharp mind, arrives to celebrate an engagement, only to uncover a web of betrayal, blackmail, and murder. A missing maid, cryptic letters, a bloodied glove, and a locked summer house point to a crime buried in the past. Sir Reginald Harrow's death was no accident. As motives of love, greed, and guilt surface, Miss Marple pulls back the curtain to reveal the truth. A young woman's rage, a family's cover-up, and a secret that could destroy them all. Will justice prevail, or will the shadows of Merryweather Hall keep their secrets forever? Chapter 1. The Invitation to Merryweather, Hallen, the gentle quiet of St. Mary Mead. Where the rhythm of life was as predictable as the chime of the church clock, Miss Jane Marple sat in her armchair by the window of her modest cottage. The late summer light filtered through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the polished oak floor. Her knitting needles moved with a soft, rhythmic click, shaping a pale blue shawl that she intended for her niece's new baby. It was a scene of serene domesticity, yet Miss Marple's mind was far from idle. Her sharp eyes, pale and keen behind her spectacles, darted occasionally to the garden, where a black bird was making a fuss over something unseen. Curious creatures, birds, she murmured to herself, always noticing what we overlook. On the table beside her lay a letter, its envelope bearing the crest of Merryweather Hall, a grand estate some 20 miles from St. Mary Mead. The letter had arrived that morning, delivered by the postman, young Tommy Pierce, who had lingered longer than necessary in hopes of a biscuit. Miss Marple, indulgent of village habits, had obliged, and now the letter rested open, its contents read and reread with the careful attention she reserved for anything that piqued her interest. The letter was from Mrs. Evelyn Harrow, a widow of considerable means and impeccable reputation, who owned Merryweather Hall. It was written in a fine, slanting hand, the ink a rich indigo that spoke of quality stationery. Mrs. Harrow invited Miss Marple to a weekend gathering to celebrate the engagement of her niece, Clara Dunhill, to Captain Felix Warrender, a man whose name Miss Marple vaguely recalled from the society pages. The tone was polite, even warm, but Miss Marple detected a faint note of insistence, a suggestion that her presence was not merely desired, but required. People do not invite elderly spinsters like myself without purpose, she thought, folding the letter with care. There is always a reason, and it is rarely as simple as it seems. Miss Marple's knowledge of Merryweather Hall was gleaned from village gossip and the occasional mention in the County Gazette. The estate, a Georgian masterpiece of honey-coloured stone, had been in the Harrow family for generations. Sir Reginald Harrow, Evelyn's late husband, had been a man of influence, though rumours of his temper and secretive nature had circulated even in St. Mary Mead. His death, 2 years prior, in a riding accident, had been much discussed, though the details remained murky. Evelyn, now the sole mistress of the hall, was said to manage the estate with a firm hand, despite whispers of financial strain. Clara, her niece, was the daughter of Evelyn's younger sister, who had died tragically young, leaving Clara in Evelyn's care. As for Captain Warrender, Miss Marple knew only that he was a decorated officer, recently returned from service abroad, with a reputation for charm and a less savoury one for gambling. The invitation intrigued her. She had met Evelyn Harrow only once, at a charity bazaar in the county town, where the widow's poised demeanour and subtle air of command had impressed her. Yet there had been something else, a flicker of unease in Evelyn's eyes when a guest mentioned Sir Reginald's name. Miss Marple, with her knack for noticing such things, had filed it away in her memory, as she did all small details that might one day prove significant. Now, as she considered the letter, she wondered what lay behind this summons. A celebration, certainly, but Miss Marple knew that gatherings of this sort often concealed deeper currents of jealousy, secrets, or worse. She rose from her chair, her movements sprightly for a woman of her years, and crossed to the bureau where she kept her writing materials. Penning a brief acceptance, she resolved to attend, not out of idle curiosity, but because her instincts told her there was a puzzle to be solved. In a village like St. Mary Mead, she reflected, one learns that the surface of things is rarely the whole story. A grand house is no different from a cottage in that regard. The journey to Merriweather Hall was arranged for the following day. Miss Marple packed a modest suitcase, including her best black silk dress and a small notebook she always carried for jotting down observations. Her maid, Florence, a sturdy woman with a penchant for melodrama, fussed over the packing, insisting on including an extra shawl for the chill of those old houses. Miss Marple smiled indulgently, knowing Florence's concern stemmed from a love of Gothic novels, rather than any real fear of drafts. The drive to Merriweather Hall was pleasant, the countryside unfolding in a patchwork of green fields and hedgerows. The chauffeur, a taciturn man named Hodges, had been sent by Mrs. Harrow, and Miss Marple used the journey to glean what she could from his silences. A good servant, she thought, knows more than he says, and Hodges is no exception. By asking innocuous questions about the estates, gardens, and staff, she learned that the household was smaller than it once was. With only a housekeeper, Mrs. Dobbs, a young maid named Lily, and a gardener who came twice a week. Hodges's tone, when mentioning Mrs. Dobbs, held a hint of disapproval, which Miss Marple noted with interest. Merriweather Hall loomed into view as the car rounded a bend, its facade both majestic and slightly forlorn. The ivy that clung to its walls seemed to hold it together, as if the house itself were weary of standing upright. The gravel drive crunched under the tires, and Miss Marple stepped out, her eyes taking in the scene with quiet precision. The front door, a massive oak affair, was opened by Mrs. Dobbs, a woman in her 50s with a face as stern as a headmistress's. Her greeting was polite but brisk, and Miss Marple sensed a tension in her posture, as if she were guarding something. Mrs. Evelyn Harrow descended the grand staircase to welcome her guest. Her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her dress a deep burgundy that spoke of both wealth and restraint. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice warm but measured, "how kind of you to come. I hope the journey was not too tiring." Her smile was gracious, but Miss Marple noticed the faint lines of strain around her eyes, as if sleep had been elusive. "Not at all, Mrs. Harrow," Miss Marple replied, her tone mild. "It is a pleasure to see Merriweather Hall. Such a fine house, though I imagine it carries many memories." Evelyn's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Indeed," she said, recovering quickly. "It has been in the family for generations. Come, let me introduce you to the others." The drawing room was a vision of faded opulence, its high ceilings adorned with plasterwork, its walls lined with portraits of stern-faced Harrows. A heavy velvet curtain, the color of claret, hung across one wall, partially obscuring a tall window that looked out onto the gardens. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the curtain, noting its weight and the way it seemed to absorb the light. A curious choice, she thought, to place such a curtain there. It hides more than the view. The guests were assembled for tea, and Evelyn made the introductions with practiced ease. Clara Dunhill, the bride-to-be, was a young woman of striking beauty, her auburn hair caught in a low bun, her eyes a vivid green that sparkled with nervous energy. She wore a simple but elegant dress of pale blue, and her smile, though warm, seemed to flicker as if she were playing a part. Captain Felix Warrender, her fiancé, was a tall man in his 30s, with dark hair and a charming manner that bordered on theatrical. His uniform, though no longer worn, seemed to linger in his bearing, but Miss Marple noted a restlessness in his movements, as if he were always on the verge of departure. Dr. Leonard Price, the local physician, was a man of middle age, with a lined face and a quiet demeanor that suggested he was more comfortable listening than speaking. His hands, Miss Marple observed, were those of a surgeon, steady, but with a faint tremor when he reached for his teacup. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, a neighbor of the Harrows, was a formidable woman in her late 40s, her sharp tongue softened by a veneer of humor. Her dress, a bold shade of emerald, clashed slightly with the room's muted tones, and Miss Marple suspected she enjoyed standing out. Finally, Mr. Roland Finch, a solicitor from the nearby town of Market Basing, was a florid man with a penchant for whiskey, his conversation peppered with legal anecdotes that he clearly found more amusing than his listeners did. The young maid, Lily, served the tea with a deference that bordered on timidity. She was no more than 20, with pale blonde hair and a face that might have been pretty if not for the shadows under her eyes. Miss Marple, ever observant, noted the way Lily's hands trembled as she poured, and the quick glance she cast at Clara, who avoided her eyes. The conversation at tea was light, centered on the engagement and the plans for the wedding. Clara spoke of a spring ceremony, her voice bright but strained, while Felix interjected with charming anecdotes of his travels. Evelyn played the perfect hostess, steering the talk away from any awkward pauses, but Miss Marple sensed an undercurrent of unease. Beatrice Langley made a pointed remark about hasty engagements, which caused Clara to flush, and Felix's smile tightened. Dr. Price, meanwhile, seemed preoccupied, his eyes drifting to the window or, perhaps, to the curtain beside it. As the afternoon wore on, Miss Marple excused herself to freshen up, guided by Mrs. Dobbs to a guest room on the second floor. The room was comfortable, with a 4-poster bed and a view of the rose gardens, but Miss Marple's attention was drawn to a small watercolor painting on the wall, a portrait of a young woman who bore a striking resemblance to Clara. Evelyn's sister, perhaps, she mused, recalling the tragic story of Clara's mother. The painting's frame was slightly askew, and when Miss Marple adjusted it, she noticed a faint mark on the wall behind it, a scratch, as if something had been dragged across the plaster. Returning to the drawing room, Miss Marple found the guests preparing for a walk in the gardens. Clara, arm in arm with Felix, seemed determined to appear cheerful, but Miss Marple caught a fleeting look of distress as they passed the velvet curtain. Evelyn, noticing Miss Marple's gaze, remarked lightly, "That old thing has been here since my husband's time. It keeps the drafts at bay." Her tone was casual, but Miss Marple sensed a deflection. The gardens were a marvel, with manicured lawns and beds of roses in full bloom. Miss Marple, walking slowly to keep pace with her thoughts, lagged behind the others, her eyes scanning the grounds. She noticed a small summer house, half hidden by a copse of yews, its windows shuttered. Something about its isolation struck her as significant, though she could not yet say why. As she rejoined the group, she overheard Beatrice Langley whispering to Roland Finch, "Clara's not herself. Mark my words, that girl's hiding something." Dinner that evening was a formal affair, served in a dining room lit by a chandelier that cast flickering shadows on the walls. The conversation turned to Merryweather Hall's history, with Evelyn recounting tales of its glory days under Sir Reginald's stewardship. Yet Miss Marple noticed gaps in her narrative moments when she skirted over her husband's later years, as if unwilling to dwell on them. Felix, too, was less ebullient than AT&T, his eyes darting to Clara whenever Evelyn mentioned the estate's future. As the meal drew to a close, Lily appeared to clear the plates, her movements hurried. Miss Marple, seated near the door, saw her pause by the sideboard, her hand brushing against a small silver box that sat there. The gesture was fleeting, but Miss Marple's eyes missed nothing. That girl is frightened, she thought, and not of the work. After dinner, the guests retired to the drawing room for coffee, and Miss Marple took the opportunity to observe them further. Clara, seated near the fireplace, seemed lost in thought, her fingers twisting a laced handkerchief. Felix stood by the window, his back to the room, while Beatrice Langley regaled Roland Finch with a story of a local scandal. Dr. Price, sipping his coffee, watched the group with an intensity that belied his quiet demeanor. Evelyn, ever the hostess, moved among them, but Miss Marple noted the way her eyes lingered on Clara, as if assessing her. As the evening drew to a close, Miss Marple excused herself, pleading fatigue. In truth, she wished to be alone with her thoughts. Back in her room, she took out her notebook and jotted down her observations. The strained smiles, the curtain's odd placement, Lily's nervousness, the scratch behind the painting, the shuttered summer house. There is a pattern here, she wrote, but it is like a tapestry scene from the back whole knots and threads. The picture will emerge, but not yet. She closed the notebook and gazed out at the moonlit gardens, her mind turning over the day's events. In St. Mary Mead, she had solved many a mystery by understanding the small things, the glance, the hesitation, the misplaced object. Merryweather Hall, she suspected, was no different. The invitation had brought her here, but it was the undercurrents, the secrets hidden behind smiles and curtains that would keep her, as she prepared for bed. A sound reached her ears, soft creak, as if someone were moving stealthily in the corridor. Slipping to the door, she peered out but saw only shadows. Yet the sound had come from the direction of the library, where the velvet curtain hung. Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. Tomorrow, she thought, I shall look more closely at that curtain. It hides something, I am sure of it. And so, with the house settling into silence, Miss Marple climbed into bed, her mind as alert as ever. The weekend at Merryweather Hall had only just begun, but already she sensed that the engagement celebration was a mere facade, concealing a truth that would require all her wit to unravel. Chapter 2. The Shadow Behind the Curtain. The morning after her arrival at Merryweather Hall dawned with a soft mist that clung to the gardens, lending the estate an air of quiet secrecy. Miss Jane Marple, having slept lightly, rose early, her mind already turning over the impressions of the previous day. The creak in the corridor, the heavy velvet curtain in the drawing room, the nervous glances of the young maid Lily Owl, these were threads in a tapestry that was yet to take shape. She dressed in her usual sensible attire, a grey tweed skirt and a lavender cardigan, and tucked her notebook into her reticule. One must be prepared, she thought, for the smallest detail may prove significant. Breakfast was served. In the dining room, where the chandelier's prisms caught the weak morning light, casting fleeting rainbows on the polished table, Mrs. Evelyn Harrow presided with her customary poise, though Miss Marple noted a faint tightness in her smile as she greeted the guests. Clara Dunhill, the bride-to-be, sat beside Captain Felix. Warrender, her hand resting lightly on his arm, but her eyes were shadowed, as if sleep had eluded her. Felix, by contrast, was all charm, regaling the table with a story of a regimental dinner in Cairo. Though Miss Marple observed that his laughter rang a touch too loud, Dr. Leonard Price, the physician, ate sparingly, his attention fixed on his plate, though his eyes flicked occasionally toward Clara. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, resplendent in a mustard-yellow dress that clashed with the room's muted elegance, dominated the conversation with tales of her travels in Italy, her voice carrying a sharpness that suggested she enjoyed provoking reactions. Mr. Roland Finch, the solicitor, was quieter, nursing a cup of black coffee with a hint of a headache in his furrowed brow, no doubt the result of the previous evening's whiskey. The housekeeper, Mrs. Dobbs, oversaw the service with a stern efficiency, while Lily, the maid, moved silently, her pale face betraying a nervous energy that Miss Marple found increasingly curious. As the meal progressed, Miss Marple steered the conversation toward Merriweather Hall's history, her questions gentle but probing. "Such a splendid house," she remarked, her eyes twinkling behind her spectacles. "It must hold many stories. Did Sir Reginald enjoy entertaining as you do, Mrs. Harrow?" Evelyn's fork paused mid-air, a fleeting hesitation that Miss Marple noted. "My husband was a private man," she replied, her tone smooth but guarded. "He preferred the company of his books and his horses to large gatherings, but he was devoted to the estate, as I am." Clara's hand tightened on her napkin, and Felix quickly interjected, "A fine legacy. Mrs. Harrow, the stables here are magnificent. I'd wager Sir Reginald's horses were the envy of the county." Evelyn inclined her head, but her smile was thin. "They were his pride," she said, and changed the subject to the weather, a topic so innocuous that Miss Marple knew it was a deliberate deflection. After breakfast, the guests dispersed, some to the gardens, others to the library, where a fire had been lit to ward off the morning chill. Miss Marple, pleading a desire to admire the room's architecture, lingered in the drawing-room, her attention fixed on the velvet curtain that had caught her eye the previous evening. It was an imposing thing, its deep claret folds pooling on the floor, obscuring the tall window behind it. She approached it slowly, her fingers brushing the fabric, which was heavier than she expected, almost as if it concealed more than glass and sky. As she stood there, Lily entered to clear the tea tray, her movements hurried. Miss Marple, with her knack for putting people at ease, smiled warmly. "You must find it quite a task, my dear, keeping such a grand house in order. Have you been here long?" Lily started, nearly dropping a saucer. "Only a few months, ma'am," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's a good place, but—" She trailed off, her eyes darting to the curtain. "But," Miss Marple prompted gently, her tone as soothing as a village gossip's. "It's nothing." "Ma'am," Lily said quickly, her cheeks flushing. She gathered the tray and fled, leaving Miss Marple to ponder her unease. That child is frightened, she thought, and not of spilled tea. The morning passed uneventfully, with the guests gathering for a light luncheon in the conservatory. Clara, however, seemed distracted, her conversation with Felix stilted. Miss Marple, seated nearby, overheard a fragment of their exchange as they stepped onto the terrace. "You mustn't speak of it," Clara whispered, her voice low but urgent. "Not here, not now." Felix's reply was muffled, but his tone carried a hint of frustration. Miss Marple's interest was piqued, but she turned her attention to Beatrice Langley, who was expounding on the virtues of Italian villas. far superior to these drafty English houses, Beatrice declared, casting a critical eye around the conservatory. Though Merryweather has its charms, I suppose. Indeed, Miss Marple agreed, her tone mild. The drawing room, for instance, is quite striking. That velvet curtain's such an unusual feature. Do you know why it's placed so? Beatrice's eyes narrowed, as if sensing a trap, but she shrugged. Evelyn's always been fond of heavy furnishings, probably to keep out the cold. Sir Reginald was forever complaining about drafts. Miss Marple nodded, filing away the comment. Drafts, she thought, or something else entirely. The afternoon brought an unexpected interruption. As the guests returned to the drawing-room for tea, a sharp cry echoed from the library. Adjacent to the drawing-room through a set of double doors, Mrs. Dobbs appeared, her face pale, her hands clasped tightly. Mrs. Harrow, she said, her voice trembling, there's something you must see. The guests followed Evelyn to the library, where the air was thick with the scent of old books and polished wood. Mrs. Dobbs pointed to the velvet curtain, which hung in this room as well. Its twin to the one in the drawing-room. It had been pulled aside, revealing a small alcove in the wall, where a wooden box, no larger than a cigar case, sat on a shelf. The box was carved with intricate patterns, but what drew every eye was the stain on its leader dark, rust smear that could only be blood. Dr. Price stepped forward, his professional demeanor asserting itself. He examined the box without touching it, his brow furrowing. It's blood, he confirmed, his voice low. Old, perhaps months or even years, but unmistakable. A murmur ran through the group. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, while Felix placed a protective arm around her. Beatrice Langley's eyes gleamed with curiosity, and Roland Finch muttered something about sensational nonsense. Evelyn, however, remained composed, though her fingers tightened on the back of a chair. It's nothing to alarm us, she said firmly. Likely a relic from one of Reginald's hunting trips. He was careless with his trophies at times. Miss Marple, standing quietly at the edge of the group, observed the reactions with keen interest. Evelyn's explanation was plausible, yet it rang hollow, like a rehearsed line. Clara's distress was genuine, but there was something else in her eyes, guilt perhaps, or fear. Felix's protectiveness seemed tinged with unease, and Dr. Price's silence was more telling than his words. Blood, Miss Marple thought, is rarely so casually left behind, and that box sits no accident. It was found today. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a stained knife, dismissed as a kitchen mishap, had proved to be the key to a long-buried crime. People hide things, she mused, but they cannot hide their natures. Evelyn, eager to dispel the tension, suggested a game of bridge to occupy the afternoon. The guests agreed, though the atmosphere remained strained. Miss Marple, pleading ignorance of the game, offered to keep score, allowing her to observe without participating. As the cards were dealt, she watched Clara's hands tremble, Felix's forced joviality, and Beatrice's sharp glances, as if she were cataloguing every move. Dr. Price played mechanically, his thoughts elsewhere, while Roland Finch grew increasingly voluble, his earlier headache forgotten in the excitement. During a lull in the game, Miss Marple excused herself to fetch a shawl from her room, but her true purpose was to revisit the library. The box had been removed by whom, she did not know, but the curtain remained slightly askew, as if hastily replaced. She approached it, her fingers tracing the hem, and noticed a faint seam where the fabric had been mended, the stitches almost invisible. Curious, she thought, to repair a curtain so carefully. What does it conceal? She pressed gently against the wall behind the curtain, feeling for any irregularity, but found nothing. Yet the alcove where the box had been was shallow, barely deep enough to hold it, suggesting it was not part of the original design. A hiding place, she concluded, but for what? As she returned to the drawing room, she caught sight of Lily in the hall, polishing a silver candlestick with unnecessary vigor. Miss Marple paused, her voice soft. "You seem troubled, my dear. Is there something you'd like to share?" Lily's eyes widened, and for a moment, Miss Marple thought she might speak. But the maid shook her head, muttering, "It's nothing, ma'am," before hurrying away. Miss Marple watched her go, her mind turning over the possibilities. That child knows something, she thought, and someone has ensured her silence. The evening brought a formal dinner, the table set with gleaming silver and crystal. Evelyn, determined to maintain appearances, steered the conversation to neutral topics: the weather, the upcoming wedding, the beauty of the gardens, yet the shadow of the box lingered, unspoken but palpable. Clara barely touched her food, and Felix's attempts at humour fell flat. Beatrice Langley, perhaps sensing the tension, made a barbed remark about secrets in old houses, which drew a sharp look from Evelyn. After dinner, as the guests retired to the drawing room for coffee, Miss Marple lingered in the hall, her eyes drawn to a portrait of Sir Reginald Harrow. He was a handsome man, with a stern jaw and piercing eyes, but there was a hardness in his expression that unsettled her. She recalled the rumours of his temper, his secretiveness, and wondered what truths he had taken to his grave. As she rejoined the group, she noticed Clara standing by the velvet curtain, her hand resting on the fabric, as if drawn to it. Felix approached, whispering something that made her flinch, and they moved away together. Miss Marple, sipping her coffee, observed the exchange, her mind piecing together the fragments of the Darther box, the curtain, Lily's fear, Clara's unease. Later, as the house settled into silence, Miss Marple sat by her window, her notebook open. She wrote, "The box is a clue, but not the heart of the matter. The curtain hides more than an alcovit conceals a truth. Clara is frightened, Felix is hiding something, and Evelyn is protecting someone. Lily knows more than she says, and the doctor's silence is telling. There is a crime here, old or new, and it will not stay hidden." She closed the notebook, her thoughts as sharp as the moonlight outside. In St. Mary Mead, she had learned that secrets, like shadows, could not be banished by light alone. They required patience, observation, and an understanding of the human heart. Merriweather Hall, she knew, was a stage, and the curtain was about to rise on a drama she was determined to unravel. Chapter 3. The Locked Box. The second morning at Merriweather Hall dawned with a crisp clarity, the mist of the previous day giving way to a pale blue sky that bathed the estate in a deceptively serene light. Miss Jane Marple, ever an early riser, sat by her bedroom window, her knitting needles idle in her lap as she gazed out at the gardens. The roses, heavy with dew, gleamed like jewels, but her thoughts were elsewhere, tangled in the threads of yesterday's discoveries: the blood-stained box, the heavy velvet curtain, and the undercurrents of tension that seemed to ripple through the household. "There is a secret here," she murmured to herself, "and it is not a small one." She dressed with her usual care, choosing a navy dress with a high collar and a brooch that had belonged to her mother. Her reticule, containing her notebook and a pencil, was tucked under her arm as she descended to the breakfast room. The atmosphere was subdued, the memory of the box in the library casting a shadow over the meal, Mrs. Evelyn Harrow, presiding, at the head of the table, maintained her composure, but Miss Marple noted the faint lines of strain around her mouth, as if she had spent the night wrestling with unspoken worries. Clara Dunhill, pale and silent, picked at her toast, her eyes avoiding those of her fiancé, Captain Felix Warrendor, who made a show of hearty appetite but seemed distracted, his fork pausing mid-air as if his thoughts were elsewhere. Dr. Leonard Price, the physician, was quieter than usual, his gaze fixed on his coffee cup, though Miss Marple caught him glancing at Clara with a mixture of concern and something less definable guilt, perhaps, or apprehension. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, in a vibrant scarlet dress that seemed to challenge the morning's calm, filled the silence with chatter about a recent auction in London, her words sharp and calculated as if testing the room's mood. Mr. Roland Finch, the solicitor, looked worse for wear, his eyes bloodshot from the previous night's indulgence, though he managed a jovial remark about the quality of the bacon. The housekeeper, Mrs. Dobbs, supervised the service with her usual severity, while Lily, the young maid, moved like a ghost, her hands trembling as she poured tea. Miss Marple, sipping her tea, steered the conversation toward neutral ground, remarking on the beauty of the library's book collection. "Such a fine room," she said, her voice mild. "I imagine it was a favorite of Sir Reginald's. Did he spend much time there?" Evelyn's smile was polite but strained. "He did," she replied. "Reginald was fond of his books, particularly his histories. The library was his sanctuary." Her tone suggested the subject was closed, but Miss Marple noted the way Clara's fingers tightened on her napkin, and Felix's quick glance at Evelyn, as if gauging her response. After breakfast, the guests were invited to join a tour of the estate's grounds, led by Evelyn, who seemed eager to distract them from the previous day's discovery. Miss Marple, pleading a slight chill, declined, expressing a wish to explore the house instead. "Old houses are so full of character," she said, her eyes twinkling. "I should like to see more of Merryweather's charm." Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. "Of course, Miss Marple, Mrs. Dobbs will show you anything you wish to see." The housekeeper's expression was unreadable, but Miss Marple sensed a flicker of unease as she was entrusted with the task. Left alone in the house, Miss Marple made her way to the library, her steps slow but purposeful. The room was as grand as she remembered, its shelves lined with leather-bound volumes, its air heavy with the scent of old paper and wax polish. The velvet curtain, still slightly askew from the previous day's disturbance, drew her attention like a magnet. She approached it, her fingers brushing the fabric, which was as heavy as she had imagined, its texture almost oppressive. Behind it, the alcove was empty, the blood-stained box removed, but Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the shelf, noting its shallow depth and the faint scratches on the wood, as if something had been dragged across it. She turned her attention to the curtain itself, examining the mended seam she had noticed the day before. The stitches were meticulous, almost invisible, suggesting a careful hand. Someone took great pains to repair this, she thought, and yet they left the box in plain sight. Why? As she stood there, Mrs. Dobbs entered, her presence abrupt. "Is there something you need, ma'am?" she asked, her tone clipped. Miss Marple smiled, her demeanor disarming. "Oh, just admiring the craftsmanship of this curtain. It's quite unusual, don't you think, to place such a heavy one here?" Mrs. Dobbs's eyes narrowed, but she replied evenly, "It's been there since Sir Reginald's time. He liked things just so." She hesitated, then added, The box has been put away, if you're wondering. Mrs. Harrow thought it best. Of course, Miss Marple said, her tone mild. It must have been quite a shock to find it. Do you know where it came from? Mrs. Dobbs's lips tightened. It was one of Sir Reginald's things, I expect. He had many oddities. She turned to leave, but Miss Marple's gentle voice stopped her. You've been with the family, eh? Long time, haven't you, Mrs. Dobbs? You must know the house's secrets better than most. The housekeeper's face stiffened, and for a moment Miss Marple thought she might say something. But Mrs. Dobbs merely nodded curtly and left, her footsteps echoing in the hall. Miss Marple watched her go, her mind turning over the encounter. That woman is loyal, she thought, but to whom and why? The morning passed, and the guests returned from their tour, their cheeks flushed from the autumn air. Luncheon was a quieter affair, the conversation stilted, as if the box's discovery had cast a pall over the group. Clara, in particular, seemed withdrawn. Her responses to Felix's attempts at cheer monosyllabic. Miss Marple, seated opposite, noted the way Clara's eyes darted to the library doors, as if expecting something or someone to emerge. After lunch, Evelyn announced that the box would be opened that afternoon under her supervision. It's best to put this nonsense to rest, she said, her voice firm. It's likely nothing more than a forgotten trinket of Reginald's, but we shall see. She glanced at Roland Finch, who nodded eagerly, clearly relishing the prospect of a mystery. The group gathered in the library, where the box had been placed on a table, its blood-stained lid gleaming dully in the firelight. It was a handsome object made of dark wood with brass fittings, its lock small but sturdy. Roland Finch, with a flourish, produced a set of tools from his pocket, declaring himself something of an resident expert. After some effort, he managed to pry the lock open, revealing the contents: a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon, a small silver key, and a single pearl earring, its mate missing. A murmur ran through the group. Clara's face paled, and she stepped back, clutching Felix's arm. Felix's expression was unreadable, but his jaw tightened. Dr. Price's hands shook slightly as he reached for the letters, only to be stopped by Evelyn's sharp command. Leave them, she said, her voice like steel. They are private, Miss Marple, standing quietly at the edge of the group, observed the reactions with keen interest. Beatrice Langley's eyes gleamed with curiosity, as if she scented scandal, while Roland Finch muttered about legal implications. Lily, who had been hovering near the door, dropped a tray of teacups, the crash startling everyone. She apologized profusely, her hands trembling, and Miss Marple noted the way her eyes fixed on the earring, as if it held some personal significance. Evelyn took charge, declaring the box's contents, family matters, and locking it away in a drawer, promising to deal with it later. There's no need for speculation, she said, her tone final. But Miss Marple, with her knack for seeing beyond the surface, knew that the box had stirred something deep. The letters, she suspected, were not mere correspondence, but evidence of a secret long buried. The key, small and ornate, suggested another lock somewhere in the house, and the earring why only one. It's a puzzle, she thought, and the pieces are scattered. As the afternoon wore on, the guests dispersed, but the tension lingered. Clara retired to her room, pleading a headache, while Felix announced his intention to take a walk, his manner brusque. Dr. Price offered to examine Clara, but she declined, and Miss Marple noted his reluctance to press the matter. Beatrice Langley cornered Roland Finch, whispering about family skeletons. while Mrs. Dobbs busied herself with unnecessary tasks, avoiding Miss Marple's gaze. Miss Marple, returning to the library alone, examined the alcove again, her fingers tracing the scratches on the shelf. She noticed a faint outline in the wood, as if the shelf could be lifted, but it was fixed in place. A hidden compartment, perhaps, she thought, or a false wall. She made a mental note to investigate further, perhaps under the guise of admiring the house's architecture. That evening, as the guests gathered for dinner, the atmosphere was strained, the box's contents an unspoken presence. Clara, though present, was silent, her eyes red-rimmed, while Felix's charm seemed forced, his anecdotes falling flat. Evelyn maintained her role as hostess, but her conversation was brittle, as if she were guarding against further revelations. Dr. Price ate sparingly, his hands steady but his expression distant, while Beatrice Langley's sharp remarks about hidden truths drew frowns from the others. Roland Finch, emboldened by wine, speculated loudly about the box's contents, earning a sharp rebuke from Evelyn. After dinner, Miss Marple lingered in the drawing-room, her eyes drawn to the velvet curtain. She noticed Lily hovering nearby, polishing a candlestick with unnecessary vigor. Approaching her gently, Miss Marple said, "You seem troubled, my dear. That earring, did it remind you of something?" Lily's face paled, and she stammered, "No, ma'am, it's nothing." But her eyes betrayed her, and Miss Marple knew she had touched a nerve. She's afraid, she thought, but of what or whom? As the house settled into silence, Miss Marple sat by her window, her notebook open. She wrote, "The box is the key, but not the whole story. The letters suggest a secret blackmail, perhaps, or a betrayal. The earring belongs to someone, and Lily knows more than she says. The curtain hides something, and the key will unlock it. There is a crime here, and it is closer than they think." She closed the notebook, her mind as sharp as the starlight outside. In St. Mary Mead, she had learned that secrets, like locked boxes, could not stay hidden forever. Merryweather Hall was no different, and Miss Marple was determined to find the truth, one careful observation at a time. Chapter 4. A disappearance. The third morning at Merryweather Hall broke with a stillness that seemed to hold its breath, as if the house itself were waiting for the next revelation. Miss Jane Marple, accustomed to the early hours, sat in her room, her knitting needles moving with a soft, rhythmic click as she pondered the events of the previous day. The blood-stained box, the letters, the single pearl earring, and the small silver key had stirred the household like a stone dropped into a still pond, sending ripples of unease through every guest and servant. Yet it was the human reactions, pallor, Felix's forced cheer, Evelyn's guarded composure, that intrigued Miss Marple most. People, she thought, betray themselves in the smallest ways, and Merryweather Hall is full of such betrayals. She dressed in a soft grey dress, its simplicity a contrast to the opulence of the house, and tucked her notebook into her reticule. As she descended the grand staircase, she noted the quiet, broken only by the distant clatter of dishes from the kitchen. The breakfast room, when she entered, was sparsely populated. Mrs. Evelyn Harrow sat at the head of the table, her posture as impeccable as ever, though her eyes held a trace of weariness. Captain Felix Warrender was present, reading a newspaper with an air of studied nonchalance, while Dr. Leonard Price sipped coffee, his face drawn. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, in a vivid violet dress that seemed to challenge the morning's sobriety, was absent, as was Mr. Roland Finch, the solicitor. Most notably, Clara Dunhill was missing, her chair empty. Miss Marple, taking her seat, remarked lightly, "I hope Miss Dunhill is well this morning. She seemed a little out of sorts yesterday." Evelyn's smile was tight. "Clara is resting," she said. "The excitement of the engagement, you know, can be quite taxing for a young woman." Felix lowered his newspaper, his expression unreadable. "She'll be down soon, I'm sure," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. Dr. Price said nothing, but his fingers tightened on his cup. A gesture Miss Marple noted with interest. The meal proceeded in near silence, broken only by Evelyn's attempts to discuss the weather and the upcoming harvest festival. Miss Marple, ever observant, sensed a tension in the room, as if the absence of Clara were only part of a larger omission. She inquired about the staff, her tone casual. "I haven't seen that nice young maid, Lily, this morning. I hope she's not unwell." Evelyn's fork paused mid-air, a fleeting hesitation. "Lily has left us," she said, her voice smooth but firm. "She gave notice last night and departed early this morning. A family matter, I believe." Miss Marple's eyes widened slightly, though her expression remained mild. "How sudden," she said. "She seemed so devoted to her duties. Did she leave no message?" Mrs. Dobbs, who had entered to refill the teapot, answered before Evelyn could respond. "She packed her things and was gone before dawn," the housekeeper said, her tone clipped. "No message, no fuss. Girls like that come and go." Miss Marple nodded, but her mind was racing. In St. Mary Mead, she had known maids who left abruptly, often for reasons more complex than family matters. Lily's nervousness, her reaction to the pearl earring, and her hurried movements suggested something more than a sudden departure. People do not vanish without cause, she thought, and Lily's cause is tied to that box. After breakfast, Miss Marple excused herself, expressing a desire to explore the upper floors of the house. Evelyn, preoccupied, agreed, and Mrs. Dobbs was tasked with accompanying her. The housekeeper's reluctance was palpable, but she led Miss Marple through the corridors. Her answers to questions about the house's history curt and uninformative. Miss Marple, undeterred, noted the layout of the rooms, the faded grandeur of the portraits, and the occasional locked door, which Mrs. Dobbs dismissed as storage. They paused at a small room at the end of a corridor, which Mrs. Dobbs identified as Lily's former quarters. "Might I see it?" Miss Marple asked, her tone innocent. "I'm always curious about how staff are housed in such grand places." Mrs. Dobbs hesitated, then unlocked the door with a key from her ring. The room was Spartan, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small wardrobe. Miss Marple's eyes swept the space, noting a half-packed bag on the bed, its contents spilling. Out ashore, a pair of gloves, and a torn photograph tucked into a corner. She bent to examine it, her movements slow to avoid alarming Mrs. Dobbs. The photograph showed a young man, perhaps 25, with a serious expression and dark eyes. The tear bisected his face, as if someone had tried to destroy it. "How sad," Miss Marple murmured, straightening. "To leave so much behind." "Did Lily say where she was going?" Mrs. Dobbs's lips tightened. "She didn't say, and I didn't ask. Servants' affairs are their own." She ushered Miss Marple out, locking the door behind them. Miss Marple, undeterred, slipped the torn photograph into her reticule when Mrs. Dobbs's back was turned. A clue, she thought, and one that Lily meant to hide or destroy. The morning passed with the guests pursuing their own activities. Felix disappeared into the gardens, claiming a need for fresh air, while Dr. Price offered to check on Clara, though Evelyn assured him it was unnecessary. Beatrice Langley and Roland Finch appeared at luncheon, the latter nursing a headache and the former full of gossip about a neighbouring estate. Miss Marple, listening, quietly steered the conversation toward Lily's departure, but Evelyn dismissed it as unimportant, and the others followed her lead. After luncheon, Miss Marple took a solitary walk in the gardens, her eyes scanning the grounds for anything out of place. The rose beds, meticulously tended, caught her attention, particularly a patch where the soil seemed freshly turned, as if someone had been digging. Kneeling carefully, she brushed away the dirt, revealing a small object wrapped in a handkerchief, a silver locket, its surface engraved with the initials LM. Inside was a miniature of the same young man from the torn photograph, his face now intact. Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. Lily Mason, I presume, she thought, but who is this man, and why hide his likeness? She tucked the locket into her reticule, her mind turning over the possibilities. In St. Mary Mead, she had once uncovered a scandal involving a locket, its owner desperate to conceal a forbidden love. Secrets, she mused, are like seeds, they take root in the dark. Returning to the house, Miss Marple learned that Clara had emerged from her room, pale but composed, and was taking tea in the conservatory with Felix. Miss Marple joined them, her presence unobtrusive, and observed their interaction. Clara's smile was strained, and Felix's hand rested on hers with a possessiveness that seemed more anxious than affectionate. "You're sure you're all right?" he asked, his voice low. Clara nodded, but her eyes flicked to the window, as if searching for an escape. Miss Marple, sipping her tea, noted the way Clara's fingers twisted her engagement ring, a sapphire that caught the light with a cold gleam. The afternoon brought another surprise. Roland Finch, emboldened by a glass of sherry, suggested they search the library for more clues about the box. "If it's Sir Reginald's," he said, "there might be papers or such like. No harm in looking, eh?" Evelyn's face tightened, but she agreed, perhaps to avoid suspicion. The group gathered in the library, where the velvet curtain seemed to loom larger than ever. Roland, with a show of enthusiasm, examined the shelves, pulling out books at random, while Beatrice Langley watched with a smirk, as if enjoying the disruption. Dr. Price remained silent, his eyes on the alcove where the box had been found, while Clara stood close to Felix, her expression unreadable. Miss Marple, feigning interest in a volume of poetry, moved closer to the curtain. She noticed a faint bulge in the fabric, as if something were caught behind it. Reaching out, she brushed her hand against it, feeling the outline of a small, hard object. Before she could investigate further, Mrs. Dobbs appeared, her voice sharp. "That curtain's heavy, ma'am. Best not to disturb it." Miss Marple smiled, withdrawing her hand. "Of course," she said, but her mind was alight. Something is hidden there, she thought, and someone is determined to keep it so. Dinner that evening was a tense affair, the absence of Lily and the memory of the box casting a pall over the table. Clara, though present, spoke little, and Felix's attempts at levity fell flat. Beatrice Langley's barbed comments about servants who run off drew a sharp look from Evelyn, who steered the conversation to safer topics. Dr. Price, unusually talkative, mentioned a case he had treated recently, a young woman with nerves, and Miss Marple wondered if he meant Lily. After dinner, as the guests retired to the drawing room, Miss Marple lingered in the hall, her eyes drawn to a small table where a vase of roses stood. Beneath it, almost hidden, was a scrap of paper receipt for a train ticket dated the previous day in Lily's name. Miss Marple slipped it into her reticule, her mind racing. She planned to leave, she thought, but did she? Later, in her room, Miss Marple sat by the window, her notebook open. She wrote, "Lily's disappearance is no coincidence. The locket and the photograph point to a secret, perhaps tied to the man in the picture. The box's contents letters, a key, an earring suggest a past wrong, and someone in this house knows it. The curtain hides more than an alcove, and Clara's fear is not just for herself. There is a crime here, and it is closer than I thought." She closed the notebook, her thoughts as clear as the moonlight outside. In St. Mary Mead, she had learned that disappearances were rarely what they seemed, and Merryweather Hall was proving no exception. The locked box had opened one door, but another, darker truth lay behind the curtain, and Miss Marple was determined to uncover it. Chapter 5. The garden discovery, the fourth morning at Merryweather Hall, unfolded under a sky heavy with the promise of rain. The air thick with the scent of damp earth and fading roses. Miss Jane Marple, who had always found early mornings conducive to thought, sat by her window, her knitting needles resting in her lap as she gazed out at the gardens. The events of the past days, the blood-stained box, the cryptic letters, the single pearl earring, the mysterious key, and Lily's sudden disappearance had woven a complex web in her mind. Each thread, from Clara's anxious silences to Mrs. Dobbs's guarded demeanor, hinted at a deeper truth, one that Merryweather Hall seemed determined to conceal. "It is like a village mystery," she mused, "only grander in scale, but no less human in its secrets." She dressed in a sensible tweed skirt and a pale green blouse, pinning her mother's cameo brooch at her collar. Her reticule, containing her notebook, the torn photograph, the train ticket receipt, and the silver locket inscribed with LM, was tucked under her arm as she descended to the breakfast room. The atmosphere was strained. The absence of Lily and Clara's continued withdrawal, casting a pall over the meal. Mrs. Evelyn Harrow, presiding with her usual elegance, wore a navy dress that matched the somber mood. Her smile as polished as the silver on the table, but no less guarded. Captain Felix Warrender, attempting to maintain his charm, made light conversation about the weather, though his eyes darted to the empty chair where Clara should have been. Dr. Leonard Price, sipping tea, seemed preoccupied, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm on the tablecloth. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, in a bold Surrey's dress that clashed with the room's muted tones, filled the silence with anecdotes about a recent trip to Bath, her tone sharp and probing. Mr. Roland Finch, nursing a headache from the previous night's port, was unusually subdued, muttering only about the inconvenience of servants who bolt. Miss Marple, her expression mild, inquired about Clara's absence. "I do hope Miss Dunhill is feeling better," she said, her voice gentle. "She seemed so quiet yesterday." Evelyn's smile flickered. "Clara is still under the weather," she replied, her tone smooth but firm, a touch of nerves, nothing more. "Dr. Price has been kind enough to look in on her." Dr. Price nodded, though his eyes avoided Miss Marple's. "She'll be right as rain soon," he said, his voice lacking conviction. Felix, stirring his coffee, added, "She's just overwhelmed with the wedding plans. You know how it is." Miss Marple nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. In St. Mary Mead, she had known young women whose nerves masked deeper troubles, fear, guilt, or secrets too heavy to bear. Clara's absence, coupled with Lily's disappearance, suggested a connection she could not yet fully grasp. She turned the conversation to the gardens, remarking on their beauty. "I should like to take a stroll later," she said. "The roses are quite splendid, even in this weather." Evelyn brightened, perhaps relieved by the change of topic. "They were Reginald's pride," she said. "He spent hours tending them." Do feel free to explore, Miss Marple. After breakfast, the guests dispersed, with Felix announcing his intention to visit the stables and Beatrice and Roland, retiring to the drawing room for a game of cards. Dr. Price excused himself to check on Clara, while Evelyn busied herself with household matters. Miss Marple, seizing the opportunity, slipped into the hall, her eyes drawn to a small table where a vase of wilting roses stood. Beneath it, she noticed a faint smudge of dirt, as if someone had brushed against it in haste. Curious, she thought, for a house so meticulously kept. She made her way to the gardens, her umbrella in hand against the threat of rain. The paths were lined with manicured hedges, but her attention was drawn to the rose beds, where she had found the silver locket the previous day. The patch of disturbed earth intrigued her, its surface uneven compared to the surrounding soil. Kneeling carefully, she brushed away the dirt, her fingers uncovering a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Unwrapping it, she found a leather-bound diary, its pages yellowed but intact, and a single glove, its delicate lace stained with what appeared to be dried blood. Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her expression remained calm. The diary bore no name, but the handwriting was feminine, the entries brief but poignant. The first she read, dated 2 years prior, spoke of a terrible row and a promise broken. Another mentioned R.H. and a debt unpaid. The glove, she noted, was of fine quality, its lace intricate, suggesting it belonged to someone of means. She tucked both items into her reticule, her mind racing. R.H. must be Sir Reginald Harrow, she thought, and this glove perhaps, it matches the earring. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a lost glove had led to the unravelling of a theft, its owner betrayed by her own carelessness. Objects, she mused, have a way of speaking when people will not. Returning to the house, Miss Marple found the atmosphere even more strained. Clara had joined the group for luncheon, her face pale but composed, though her eyes avoided Felix's. Beatrice Langley, sensing the tension, made a pointed remark about young women who take to their beds, earning a sharp look from Evelyn. Dr. Price, unusually talkative, spoke of a patient he had treated for shock, his words seeming to carry a hidden meaning. Roland Finch, revived by a glass of wine, speculated about Lily's departure, suggesting she had run off with a bow. Miss Marple, listening quietly, noted the way Clara's hands trembled at the mention of Lily's name. After luncheon, Miss Marple sought out Mrs. Dobbs, finding her in the pantry polishing silver. "Such a pity about Lily," she said, her tone sympathetic. "She seemed a good girl. Did she leave any word of where she was going?" Mrs. Dobbs's hands stilled, her expression guarded. "She left in a hurry," she said. "No word, no warning. Young girls are flighty these days." Miss Marple nodded, but her eyes lingered on Mrs. Dobbs's hands, which were flecked with soil. "You've been in the garden, perhaps?" she asked, her voice innocent. Mrs. Dobbs flushed, wiping her hands on her apron. "Just tending to some herbs," she muttered, and turned away, her movements brisk. Miss Marple returned to the library, her thoughts on the diary and the glove. The velvet curtain, still slightly askew, drew her attention once more. She examined it closely, noting a faint tear near the hem, as if something had caught on it. Reaching behind, she felt the wall, her fingers tracing a faint seam where the plaster met the wood paneling. A hidden panel, perhaps, she thought, or a door long forgotten. Before she could investigate further, Felix entered, his expression tense. "Miss Marple," he said, his charm strained. "Evelyn was wondering where you'd got to. We're planning a drive to the village this afternoon." "How kind," Miss Marple replied, her tone mild. "I was just admiring the library. It's such a fascinating room, don't you think? So full of history." Felix's eyes flicked to the curtain, and for a moment Miss Marple thought he might say something. But he merely nodded and left, his footsteps quick. He knows something, she thought, and he's afraid of it. The drive to the village was postponed due to a sudden downpour, and the guests gathered in the drawing room instead. Clara, still pale, sat by the fire, her hands twisting a handkerchief. Felix hovered nearby, his attentiveness tinged with anxiety. Beatrice Langley, ever observant, whispered to Roland Finch about lovers' quarrels, while Dr. Price watched. The couple with a furrowed brow. Evelyn, playing the hostess, suggested a reading from a novel. But the mood was too heavy for such diversions. Miss Marple, seated in a corner, took out her knitting, her eyes moving from one guest to another. She noted the way Clara avoided looking at the curtain, the way Felix's hand rested on her shoulder, and the way Dr. Price's gaze lingered on them both. There is a connection here, she thought, and it is not just love or jealousy. That evening, as dinner was served, the tension reached a peak. Beatrice Langley, emboldened by wine, remarked on the strange goings-on in the house, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "First a blood-stained box, now a missing maid," she said. "One might think Merryweather Hall is hiding something." Evelyn's smile was icy. "Nonsense, Beatrice," she said. "Lily left of her own accord, and the box is a family matter. Let's not indulge in idle speculation." Clara's fork clattered to her plate, and she excused herself, her face ashen. Felix followed, his expression grim. Miss Marple, watching them go, noted Dr. Price's sudden stillness, as if he were holding his breath. He knows more than he says, she thought, and so does Evelyn. After dinner, Miss Marple slipped into the garden under the guise of needing air. The rain had stopped, leaving the ground soft and yielding. She returned to the rose bed, her flashlight casting a narrow beam. The disturbed earth was still evident, but now she noticed faint footprints leading to the summer house she had seen earlier. The structure, half hidden by use, was locked, its shutters tight. She tried the small silver key from the box, but it did not fit. Another lock then, she thought, but where? As she turned to leave, she heard a rustle in the bushes. Turning her light, she caught a glimpse of a figure, too fleeting to identify, slipping into the shadows. Someone is watching, she thought, her heart steady despite the chill. She closed the notebook, her thoughts as sharp as the night air. In St. Mary Mead, she had learned that gardens, like houses, held secrets, and Merryweather Hall's roses were no exception. The discovery in the garden had opened another door, and Miss Marple was determined to step through it. Chapter 6. The Solicitor's Tale, the Fifth Morning at Merryweather. Hall greeted its occupants with a sky bruised by heavy clouds, the air thick with the promise of a storm that seemed to mirror the gathering tension within the house. Miss Jane Marple, who had always found the quiet hours before breakfast ideal for reflection, sat in her room, her knitting needles still as she reviewed the tangled threads of the mystery before her. The blood-stained box, the cryptic letters, the single pearl earring, the small silver key, Lily's disappearance, and the recent discovery of the diary and blood-stained glove in the garden all pointed to a secret buried deep within the harrow. Family, yet it was the human element, the glances and silences, that held her attention most. In a village, she thought, One learns that secrets are never truly hidden. They are merely waiting to be noticed. She dressed in a sober charcoal dress, its simplicity offset by a pearl pin, and tucked her reticule, now heavy with the photograph, locket, train ticket receipt, diary, and glove under her arm. As she descended to the breakfast room, she noted the hush that enveloped the house, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder. The table was sparsely attended, with Mrs. Evelyn Harrow presiding as always, her silver hair impeccable but her eyes shadowed by fatigue. Captain Felix Warrender was present, his charm subdued, his attention fixed on a piece of toast he barely touched. Clara Dunhill, to Miss Marple's relief, had returned, though her face was pale and her smile fragile, as if held together by sheer will. Dr. Leonard Price sat quietly, his hands steady but his expression distant, while Mrs. Beatrice Langley, in a striking indigo dress, filled the silence with chatter about a storm she had endured in Cornwall. Mr. Roland Finch, the solicitor, was late, his absence noted with a raised eyebrow from Evelyn. Miss Marple, taking her seat, remarked on the weather, her tone mild. "Such a dramatic sky," she said. "It reminds me of a storm in St. Mary Mead, when a tree fell and revealed a nest of secrets in its roots. Storms have a way of bringing things to light, don't you think?" Evelyn's smile was polite but strained. "Indeed," she replied, "though I hope this one passes without incident." Her eyes flicked to Clara, who seemed to shrink under the scrutiny. Felix, attempting to lighten the mood, spoke of a storm he had weathered at sea, but his story faltered, and Clara's hand trembled as she reached for her tea. Dr. Price, unusually reticent, offered no comment, his gaze fixed on the window. Miss Marple, sipping her tea, noted the way the group avoided mentioning Lily's departure or the box, as if by unspoken agreement. As breakfast ended, Roland Finch appeared, his face flushed and his tie slightly askew. "Apologies," he said, his voice thick with the remnants of last night's whiskey. "Overslept, I'm afraid. Storms always make me restless." Evelyn's expression was cool. "No matter, Mr. Finch. Do join us for coffee in the drawing room." Miss Marple, sensing an opportunity, lingered as the others dispersed, engaging Finch in conversation about his work. "You must see many interesting cases as a solicitor," she said, her tone disarming. "Estates like Merryweather Hall must keep you busy with their complexities." Finch, flattered by her interest, grew talkative, accepting a glass of sherry. Despite the early hour, "Oh, indeed, Miss Marple," he said, settling into an armchair. "The Harrow estate is a tangle, I can tell you. Sir Reginald was a shrewd man, but not always prudent. Debts, you know, and a few unwise investments." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "How fascinating," she said. "I suppose his death left things in quite a state." Finch hesitated, his glass pausing mid-air. "Well, yes," he admitted. "The estate was mortgaged to the hilt when he died. Evelyn's done her best, but it's a struggle. Clara's inheritance, now that's another matter. Tied up in a trust until she marries, and even then, it's not what it seems." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of polite curiosity, though her mind was racing. "And Captain Warren," she said, "he must be pleased to secure such a match." Finch's lips curled in a knowing smile. "Lucky man, some might say. But luck has a way of turning, doesn't it? Sir Reginald wasn't one to let go of his money easily, and there were complications." Miss Marple, sensing a deeper story, pressed gently. "Complications? How intriguing. Did Sir Reginald keep many secrets?" Finch, warmed by the sherry, grew expansive. Oh, he was a secretive sort, all right. Kept papers locked away in that library, behind that blasted curtain, if you ask me. Always fussing with his boxes and keys. I handled some of his affairs. You know, debts, payments, that sort of thing. There was one matter, a regular sum paid out to someone. Initials LM, never knew who it was, mind you, but it stopped when he died. Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained serene. LM, she said, as if musing. How curious. And this was before his accident. Finch nodded, then caught himself, as if realizing he had said too much. Well, it's all in the past now, he muttered, draining his glass. No use dredging it up. Miss Marple smiled, but her mind was alight. LM matched the initials on the locket, and the payments suggested a connection to Lily or someone close to her. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a solicitor's careless talk had revealed a blackmail scheme hidden in estate accounts. Money, she thought, is often the key to motive. The conversation was interrupted by Beatrice Langley, who swept into the room, her indigo dress rustling. Really, Roland, she said, her tone sharp. You'll bore Miss Marple with your legal tales. Come, let's have a game of bridge to pass this dreary day. Finch, chastened, agreed, but Miss Marple declined, pleading a desire to rest. In truth, she wished to explore the library again, her thoughts on the curtain and the papers Finch had mentioned. Slipping away, she found the room empty, the fire low but casting enough light to illuminate the heavy velvet curtain. She approached it, her fingers tracing the mended seams she had noticed before. The fabric was stiff, as if something were concealed within its folds. Pressing gently, she felt a faint resistance, but before she could investigate further, the door opened, and Mrs. Dobbs appeared, her expression stern. Looking for something, ma'am? The housekeeper asked, her voice edged with suspicion. Miss Marple smiled, undaunted. Just admiring the curtain again, she said. It's such a striking feature. Was it Sir Reginald's choice, do you think? Mrs. Dobbs's eyes narrowed. It's been here as long as I have, she said curtly. If you'll excuse me, I've duties to attend to. She left, her footsteps heavy, and Miss Marple noted the soil on her apron, a detail that echoed the dirt she had seen in the garden. The afternoon brought a lull, with the guests scattered about the house as the storm gathered strength outside. Clara, emerging briefly, joined Felix in the conservatory, their conversation hushed but intense. Miss Marple, passing by under the guise of fetching a book, overheard Clara whisper, "You promised you wouldn't tell." Felix's reply was inaudible, but his tone was sharp, and Clara's face crumpled as she turned away. Miss Marple, returning to the library, examined the alcove where the box had been found. The scratches on the shelf intrigued her, suggesting frequent use. She pressed the wood, feeling for a hidden catch, but found nothing. Patience, she thought, is the key to such puzzles. Dinner that evening was a strained affair, the storm's rumble punctuating the silences. Evelyn maintained her role as hostess, but her composure seemed brittle, as if the weight of the house's secrets were pressing on her. Clara, though present, spoke little, her eyes darting to the library doors. Felix's charm was forced, his anecdotes falling flat, while Beatrice Langley's sharp remarks about family skeletons drew frowns from the others. Dr. Price, unusually talkative, mentioned a case of a patient who had vanished from his care, his words seeming to carry a hidden weight. Roland Finch, emboldened by wine, returned to the topic of Sir Reginald's affairs, hinting at debts unpaid before Evelyn cut him off with a look. After dinner, Miss Marple lingered in the hall, her eyes drawn to a portrait of Sir Reginald. His stern features softened by the artist's brush, but no less imposing. She recalled Finch's words about the payments to LM, and wondered if they were linked to the diary's mention of a debt unpaid. Sir Reginald, she thought, was a man who kept secrets, and they did not die with him. As the guests retired to the drawing-room, Miss Marple slipped into the garden, the rain having eased to a drizzle. She returned to the rose bed, her flashlight illuminating the disturbed earth. The footprints she had seen before were still visible, leading to the summer house. She tried the door again, but it remained locked, and the silver key was too small. Another lock, she thought, and another secret. A noise behind her made her turn, but the garden was empty, the shadows thick with possibility. Someone is watching, she thought, her heart steady despite the chill. Returning to the house, she passed the library, where the curtains seemed to beckon. She paused, her hand brushing the fabric, and felt the same resistance as before. Tomorrow, she thought, I must find what lies behind it. In her room, Miss Marple sat by the window, her notebook open. She wrote, Finch's tale confirms a secret tied to Sir Reginald's money payments to LM. Perhaps Lily or someone close. The diary speaks of a row and a debt, the glove of violence. And Mrs. Dobbs knows more than she admits. The curtain hides something tangible, and the summer house may hold the answer. A crime lies at the heart of this, and it is not yet buried. She closed the notebook. Her thoughts as sharp as the lightning that flashed outside, in St. Mary Mead. She had learned that solicitors, like gardeners, often knew more than they said, and Merriweather Hall was proving no exception. The tale of Roland Finch had opened another door, and Miss Marple was determined to step through it. Chapter 7. The doctor's confession. The 6th morning at Merriweather Hall arrived with a restless energy, the storm of the previous night having left the air heavy and the grounds sodden. Miss Jane Marple, who found the early hours a fertile time for piecing together the fragments of a puzzle, sat by her window, her knitting needles idle as she gazed out at the rain-soaked gardens. The discoveries of the past days, the blood-stained box, the letters, the pearl earring, the small silver key, Lily's disappearance, the diary and blood-stained glove in the garden, and Mr. Roland Finch's revelations about Sir Reginald's secretive payments had woven a tapestry of intrigue, its pattern still obscured, but growing clearer with each new thread. Yet it was the human undercurrents, the guarded glances and strained silences, that held her attention most. People, she thought, are like books one must read between the lines to find the truth. She dressed in a sober navy dress, its high neck adorned with a simple silver brooch, and tucked her reticule now, a repository of clues, including the torn photograph, the locket inscribed with LM, the train ticket receipt, the diary, and the blood-stained glove under her arm. As she descended to the breakfast room, she noted the oppressive quiet of the house, broken only by the distant drip of water from a leaking gutter. The table was sparsely attended, with Mrs. Evelyn Harrow presiding with her usual poise, though her eyes betrayed a sleepless night. Captain Felix Warrendore was present, his charm frayed, his attention fixed on a cup of coffee he barely sipped. Clara Dunhill, pale and withdrawn, sat beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, in a bold emerald dress, that seemed to defy the morning's gloom, chattered about a local scandal, her tone calculated to provoke. Mr. Roland Finch, still recovering from his nocturnal indulgences, muttered complaints about the damp, while Dr. Leonard Price was absent, a fact that drew Miss Marple's notice. Miss Marple, taking her seat, remarked on the storm's aftermath, her voice gentle. "Such a tempest last night," she said. "In St. Mary Mead, we once had a storm that washed away a bridge and revealed a secret long buried. Nature has a way of uncovering things, don't you think?" Evelyn's smile was tight. "Let us hope it uncovers nothing more than mud," she replied, her tone light but strained. Clara's hands tightened, and Felix's jaw twitched. As if the remark had struck a nerve, Miss Marple turned the conversation to Dr. Price's absence. "I hope the doctor is well," she said. "He seemed rather preoccupied yesterday." Evelyn hesitated, then said, "He's attending to a patient in the village, I believe. He'll join us later." Her words were smooth, but Miss Marple noted the flicker of unease in her eyes, as if the doctor's absence were more significant than she let on. Breakfast passed with little conversation, the weight of the previous day's events pressing on the group. As the meal ended, Miss Marple excused herself, expressing a desire to explore the house's upper rooms. Evelyn, distracted, agreed, and Mrs. Dobbs was summoned to guide her, though the housekeeper's reluctance was palpable. Miss Marple, undeterred, followed her through the corridors, noting the locked doors and faded portraits. Her questions about the house's history met with curt replies. They paused at a small attic room, which Mrs. Dobbs identified as storage. But Miss Marple's keen eyes spotted a faint outline on the floor, as if a trapdoor had been sealed shut. Curious, she thought, for a house so full of secrets to hide its spaces so carefully. Returning to the ground floor, Miss Marple found Dr. Price in the hall, his coat damp from the rain. He looked startled to see her, his hands fidgeting with his medical bag. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice uneven. "I didn't expect to find you here." "I was just admiring the house," she replied, her tone disarming. "You've been out in the storm, I see. A patient, perhaps?" Dr. Price nodded, his eyes avoiding hers. "A minor case in the village," he said. "Nothing serious." But his tone was strained, and Miss Marple sensed he was concealing something, sensing an opportunity. She steered him toward the library, suggesting they take tea there to warm him after his outing. Dr. Price, perhaps too weary to resist, agreed, and they settled by the fire, the velvet curtain looming in the background. Miss Marple, with her knack for gentle probing, began. "You must see many secrets in your profession, Dr. Price. People confide in doctors, don't they, when they trust no one else?" Dr. Price's hands tightened on his cup, and, for a moment, she thought he might deflect. But the strain of the past days seemed to weigh on him, and he spoke, his voice low. "You're right, Miss Marple. People do confide, sometimes more than they should. And sometimes a doctor sees things he wishes he hadn't." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained sympathetic. "Such as Sir Reginald's death, perhaps," she said softly. "It must have been a difficult time for the household." Dr. Price's face paled, and he set down his cup, his hands trembling. "You're a perceptive woman," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, it was difficult, more than you know. I was called to the hall the night he died. It wasn't just a riding accident, you see. There was a wound, a cut on his arm, deep and clean, like a knife had made it. I thought it was from the fall, perhaps a sharp branch, but—" He trailed off, his eyes fixed on the fire. "But you weren't certain," Miss Marple prompted, her voice gentle but firm. Dr. Price shook his head, his words coming in a rush. "I should have reported it, but Evelyn, she begged me to keep quiet, said it would ruin the family, bring scandal. I dressed the wound, signed the death certificate. as an accident, and that was that. But I've never been easy about it. And now, with that box and Lily gone—" He stopped, as if realizing he had said too much. Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. "And the box," she said, "did it remind you of anything?" Dr. Price hesitated, then said, "I saw Sir Reginald with a box like that once, in this very room. He was locking something away, muttering about debts paid. I didn't think much of it then, but now—" He shook his head, his face etched with guilt. Miss Marple recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a doctor's silence had concealed a crime until the truth forced its way out. Guilt, she thought, is a heavy burden, and Dr. Price carries it. She thanked him for his candor, her tone soothing, and he left. His shoulders slumped. The afternoon brought a lull, with the guests scattered about the house. Clara, emerging briefly, joined Felix in the conservatory, their conversation hushed but intense. Miss Marple, passing by, overheard Felix say, "You must trust me, Clara. It's the only way." Clara's reply was inaudible, but her eyes were filled with tears. Miss Marple returned to the library, her thoughts on Dr. Price's confession. The velvet curtain, as always, drew her attention. She examined it closely, noting the faint tear she had seen before, now slightly wider, as if someone had tugged at it. Pressing the wall behind it, she felt a slight give, suggesting a panel or door, but it was locked or sealed. The key, she thought, must fit somewhere. Dinner that evening was a tense affair, the storm's aftermath casting a gloom. Over the table, Evelyn maintained her composure, but her eyes lingered on Clara, who ate little and spoke less. Felix's charm was strained, his attempts at humor falling flat. Beatrice Langley, sensing the mood, made a barbed remark about doctors who keep secrets, drawing a sharp look from Dr. Price. Roland Finch, revived by wine, speculated about the box's contents, suggesting love letters or worse, until Evelyn silenced him with a glare. After dinner, Miss Marple lingered in the hall, her eyes drawn to a small table where a vase of roses stood, their petals beginning to fall. Beneath it, she found a scrap of fabric lace, matching the blood-stained glove. Another piece, she thought, slipping it into her reticule. Later, in her room, she sat by the window, her notebook open. She wrote, "Dr. Price's confession confirms a crime. Sir Reginald's death was no accident. The knife wound suggests violence, and Evelyn's silence points to a cover-up. The box held his secrets, perhaps tied to L.M. Lilly or another. The glove and lace suggest a woman's involvement, and Clara's fear is tied to Felix's promises. The curtain conceals a door, and the key will unlock it. The summer house remains a mystery, and someone is watching. The crime is old, but its shadow lingers." She closed the notebook, her thoughts as sharp as the rain that pattered outside. In St. Mary Mead, she had learned that confessions, like storms, revealed truths long buried, and Merriweather Hall was no exception. Dr. Price's words had opened another door, and Miss Marple was determined to step through it. Chapter 8. The curtain parted. The seventh morning at Merriweather Hall dawned with a deceptive calm. The storm of the previous night having cleared to leave a sky of pale, uncertain blue. Miss Jane Marple, whose habit of rising early had served her well in unraveling many a village mystery, sat by her window, her knitting needles still as she contemplated the intricate web of secrets that had entangled the household. The blood-stained box, the cryptic letters, the single pearl earring, the small silver key, Lily's disappearance, the diary and blood-stained glove found in the garden, Mr. Roland Finch's revelations about Sir Reginald's payments, and Dr. Leonard Price's confession about the knife wound. These were pieces of a puzzle that was beginning to take shape. Yet it was the human elements, the fleeting glances and guarded words, that held the key. In a house like this, she thought, secrets are like shadows, they cling to every corner, waiting for the light. She dressed in a quiet grey dress, its simplicity offset by a lavender scarf, and tucked her reticule. Now a treasure trove of clues, including the torn photograph, the locket inscribed with LM, the train ticket receipt, the diary, the blood-stained glove, and the scrap of lace under her arm. As she descended to the breakfast room, she noted the hushed atmosphere, broken only by the soft clink of cutlery and the distant cooing of doves in the garden. The table was sparsely attended, with Mrs. Evelyn Harrow presiding, her silver hair impeccable but her eyes shadowed by strain. Captain Felix Warrender was present, his charm worn thin, his attention fixed on a newspaper he barely read. Clara Dunhill, pale and silent, sat beside him, her hands clasped tightly, as if anchoring herself against some unseen tide. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, in a vibrant crimson dress that seemed to challenge the morning's sobriety, filled the silence. With tales of a London soiree, her tone sharp and probing. Mr. Roland Finch, looking worse for wear, muttered about the damp air. While Dr. Leonard Price, newly returned from his village rounds, ate sparingly. His expression guarded Miss Marple. Taking her seat, remarked on the garden's beauty, her voice gentle. "The roses look particularly fine this morning," she said. "I noticed a summer house among them yesterdays, so charming, though it seems unused. Was it a favourite of Sir Reginald's?" Evelyn's smile was tight. "It was his retreat," she replied. "He liked to read there in summer, but it's been locked since his death. Too many memories, I suppose." Her tone was light, but Miss Marple noted the way Clara's hands tightened, and Felix's eyes flicked to Evelyn as if gauging her words. Miss Marple turned the conversation to Dr. Price, her tone disarming. "You must be busy, Doctor, with your village patients. It's a comfort to have you here, especially with all these little mysteries about." Dr. Price's fork paused, and he managed a weak smile. "I do what I can," he said, his voice low, though some mysteries are best left alone. Miss Marple nodded, but her mind was racing. Dr. Price's confession the previous day had confirmed that Sir Reginald's death was no mere accident, and his unease suggested he knew more than he had revealed. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a doctor's reluctance had hidden a truth until the evidence forced it into the open. Secrets, she thought, are like wounds, they fester, if not aired. After breakfast, Evelyn announced that the box's contents would be examined further under her supervision to put an end to speculation. She invited the guests to join her in the library, where the box had been placed on a table, its blood-stained lid a stark contrast to the polished wood. Roland Finch, eager to play a role, offered to open it again, his tools at the ready. The group gathered, their faces a study in contrasts: Clara's pallor, Felix's tension, Beatrice's curiosity, Dr. Price's unease, and Evelyn's forced composure. Finch, with a flourish, opened the box, revealing the bundle of letters, the pearl earring, and the small silver key. Evelyn reached for the letters, but Miss Marple, with a gentle cough, suggested they be read aloud to satisfy everyone's curiosity. Evelyn hesitated, then agreed, perhaps sensing that refusal would raise more questions. The letters, written in Sir Reginald's precise hand, were addressed to an unnamed recipient, their tone urgent. They spoke of a debt paid in silence, a promise broken, and a scandal to be avoided. One letter mentioned LMD and a sum of money, echoing Finch's earlier tale of payments. Clara, hearing this, gasped and turned away, her hand clutching Felix's arm. Felix's jaw tightened, and Dr. Price's face grew pale. Miss Marple, observing silently, noted the reactions. These letters, she thought, are the key to the past, and someone here fears their truth. She turned her attention to the key, its small size suggesting it opened something delicate, a drawer, perhaps, or a hidden compartment. The earring, she suspected, belonged to a woman of significance, its mate lost or deliberately withheld. As the group dispersed, Clara fled to her room, her eyes brimming with tears. Felix followed, his expression grim, while Beatrice whispered to Finch about family scandals. Dr. Price lingered, his hands fidgeting, and Miss Marple seized the moment to draw him aside. Those letters, she said softly, must have stirred memories. Doctor, did Sir Reginald ever speak of such matters to you? Dr. Price's eyes darted to the curtain, then back to her. He was a private man, he said, his voice strained, but he was troubled in his last month's talk of debts and betrayals. I thought it was the strain of his finances, but now... He trailed off, his guilt palpable. Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning to the curtain. She returned to the library alone, her eyes fixed on the heavy velvet, its mended seam now a beacon of suspicion. She approached it, her fingers tracing the fabric, and felt the same resistance she had noted before. With a gentle tug, she pulled the curtain aside, revealing the alcove and, to her surprise, a faint outline in the wall panel, cleverly disguised by the woodwork. Pressing it, she felt it give slightly, but it was locked. She tried the small silver key from the box, and with a soft click, the panel opened, revealing a narrow compartment. Inside was a ledger, its pages filled with Sir Reginald's meticulous handwriting. It detailed payments to LM over several years, each entry accompanied by a date and a cryptic note for silence, for loyalty, for peace. The payments ceased abruptly 2 years prior, coinciding with Sir Reginald's death. Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her expression remained calm. This, she thought, is the heart of the Matara secret worth killing for. She closed the panel, replacing the curtain, and slipped the ledger into her reticule. As she turned to leave, she heard a soft creak behind her, spinning. Around, she saw only the empty room, but the curtain swayed slightly, as if disturbed by a draught or a presence. Someone is watching, she thought, her heart steady despite the chill. The afternoon brought a strained calm, with the guests pursuing their own activities. Clara remained in her room, attended by Felix, while Beatrice and Finch played cards, their conversation laced with speculation about the letters. Dr. Price, claiming a headache, retired to his room, and Evelyn busied herself with household matters, her composure brittle. Miss Marple, under the guise of reading, examined the ledger in her room, noting the dates and sums. One entry, dated a month before Sir Reginald's death, read, LM final payment, if she agrees. Lily Mason, she thought, or someone else with those initials. But why did it stop? Dinner was a tense affair, the weight of the letters and Lily's absence pressing on the group. Evelyn maintained her role as hostess, but her smiles were forced, and Clara's silence was deafening. Felix's attempts at levity fell flat, and Beatrice's barbed remarks about hidden truths drew sharp looks. Dr. Price, unusually silent, ate little, his eyes fixed on his plate. Roland Finch, emboldened by wine, speculated about the key, suggesting it opened some old family vault, until Evelyn silenced him with a glare. After dinner, Miss Marple lingered in the hall, her eyes drawn to a portrait of Sir Reginald's. Sister Clara's mother, whose resemblance to her daughter was striking. The painting's frame was slightly askew, and Miss Marple, adjusting it, noticed a faint scratch on the wall, similar to the one in her room. Another hiding place, she thought, or a mark of haste. Later, in her room, she sat by the window, her notebook open. She wrote, "The ledger confirms payments to L.M., likely Lily, for a secret Sir Reginald wished to keep. The letters speak of betrayal, the earring of a woman's involvement, and the glove of violence. Dr. Price's confession points to murder, and Evelyn's silence protects someone, Clara, perhaps, or Felix. The panel behind the curtain is a door to the truth, and the summer house may hold another. Someone is watching, and the crime is closer than ever." She closed the notebook, her thoughts as sharp as the moonlight outside. In St. Mary Mead, she had learned that secrets, like curtains, could be parted with patience, and Merryweather Hall was proving no exception. The panel's discovery had revealed a new layer, and Miss Marple was determined to uncover the rest. Chapter 9. The Hidden Motive. The 8th morning at Merryweather Hall dawned with a fragile clarity. The sky, a pale wash of blue, streaked with wisps of cloud, as if the world were holding its breath before the next storm. Miss Jane Marple, whose early rising was as much a habit as a necessity for piecing together the intricacies of human behavior, sat by her window, her knitting needles still as she reviewed the tapestry of clues that had accumulated over the past days. The blood-stained box, the cryptic letters, the single pearl earring, the small silver key, Lily's sudden disappearance, the diary and blood-stained glove found in the garden, Mr. Roland Finch's revelations about Sir Reginald's secretive payments, Dr. Leonard Price's confession of a knife wound, and the hidden ledger behind the library's velvet curtain all pointed to a crime rooted deep in the Harrow family's past. Yet it was the motives hidden beneath layers of propriety and deception that now occupied her thoughts. In a village like St. Mary Mead, she mused, motives are rarely grand. They are human, born of love, fear, or greed. She dressed in a sober lavender dress, its high collar adorned with a modest pearl pin, and tucked her reticule. A veritable archive of evidence, containing the torn photograph, the locket inscribed with L.M., the train ticket receipt, the diary, the blood-stained glove, the scrap of lace, and the ledger under her arm. As she descended to the breakfast room, she noted the oppressive hush that enveloped the house, broken only by the faint rustle of leaves outside and the occasional creak of the old timbers. The table was sparsely attended, with Mrs. Evelyn Harrow presiding, her silver hair immaculate, but her eyes shadowed by a wariness that no amount of poise could conceal. Captain Felix Warrender was present, his usual charm replaced by a distracted air, his fingers drumming on the tablecloth. Clara Dunhill, pale and silent, sat beside him, her gaze fixed on her untouched plate, her hands twisting a napkin into knots. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, in a striking sapphire dress that seemed to challenge the morning's gloom, filled the silence with tales of a recent opera, her tone sharp and calculated. Mr. Roland Finch, looking haggard from his nocturnal indulgences, muttered about the coffee's bitterness, while Dr. Leonard Price, newly returned from an early morning call, ate sparingly, his expression guarded. Miss Marple, taking her seat, remarked on the house's atmosphere, her voice gentle. "Such a quiet morning," she said. "In St. Mary Mead, We often found that quiet days followed stormy nights, but they brought their own revelations. Secrets have a way of surfacing, don't they? Evelyn's smile was tight, her fork pausing mid-air. "Let us hope for a peaceful day," she replied, her tone smooth but strained. Clara's hands stilled, and Felix's drumming ceased, his eyes flicking to Evelyn as if weighing her words. Miss Marple turned the conversation to the summer house, her tone disarming. "I noticed that charming summer house in the garden again," she said. "It seems such a pity it's locked. Was it used often in Sir Reginald's time?" Evelyn's expression flickered, but she recovered quickly. "It was his private retreat," she said. "He kept it locked, even from me. After his death, I saw no reason to open it." Her words were clipped, and Miss Marple noted the way Clara's shoulders tensed, as if the mention of the summer struck a chord. Felix, attempting to lighten the mood, spoke of a garden party he had attended abroad, but his story faltered, and Clara's silence grew heavier. Dr. Price, unusually reticent, offered no comment, his gaze fixed on his coffee. Miss Marple, sipping her tea, observed the group, her mind turning over the ledger's entries and Dr. Price's confession. Motives, she thought, are like roots, they run deep and unseen. After breakfast, the guests dispersed, with Felix announcing his intention to ride into the village, claiming a need to send a telegram. Clara retired to her room, pleading a headache, while Beatrice and Finch settled in the drawing room for a game of cards. Dr. Price, citing a patient, excused himself, but Miss Marple, sensing his unease, followed him to the hall under the guise of fetching a shawl. "You look troubled, Doctor," she said softly. "Is it the weight of the past, or something more recent?" Dr. Price's eyes widened, and for a moment she thought he might deflect, but his shoulders slumped, and he spoke, his voice low. "You see too much, Miss Marple. The past, yes, it haunts this house. I told you about Sir Reginald's wound, but there's more. He was angry that night, ranting about betrayal. I heard him arguing with someone in the library before the accident. A woman's voice, I think, but I couldn't be sure. I should have pressed, but I didn't." Miss Marple nodded, her expression sympathetic. "And Lily," she said, "did she ever speak of such things?" Dr. Price hesitated, then said, "She came to me a month ago, nervous, asking about old injuries, said she'd found something in the house that worried her. I thought she was imagining things, but now," he trailed off, his guilt palpable. Miss Marple thanked him, her mind racing. A woman's voice, a betrayal, and Lily's questions suggested a connection to the ledger's payments to LM. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a whispered argument had led to a revelation of infidelity and revenge. Motives, she thought, are often personal, and this one is no exception. Returning to the library, Miss Marple examined the velvet curtain, its mended seam now a familiar beacon. She tugged it aside, revealing the hidden panel she had discovered the previous day. The ledger was safely in her reticule, but she pressed the panel again, testing its edges. To her surprise, it gave slightly, revealing a narrow crevice where a folded piece of paper was wedged. She extracted it carefully, unfolding it to reveal a letter in Sir Reginald's hand, addressed to Ellen. It spoke of a final meeting and a promise kept, dated the day before his death. This, she thought, is the motive laid bare. She slipped the letter into her reticule, her heart quickening. The panel, she suspected, held more secrets. But before she could explore further, Mrs. Dobbs appeared, her face stern. "You're very fond of that curtain, ma'am," she said, her tone edged with suspicion. Miss Marple smiled, undaunted. "It's such a striking feature," she replied. "I was wondering if it was chosen for its weight, to hide something, perhaps." Mrs. Dobbs's eyes narrowed, but she said only, "It's been here years. If you'll excuse me, I've work to do." She left, her apron flecked with soil, a detail Miss Marple noted with interest. The afternoon brought a tense calm, with the guests scattered about the house. Clara emerged briefly, joining Felix in the conservatory, their conversation hushed, but intense. Miss Marple, passing by, overheard Clara say, "You swore you'd keep it secret." Felix's reply was sharp, his voice low, and Clara's eyes filled with tears. Miss Marple, returning to the garden, revisited the rose bed, her flashlight illuminating the disturbed earth. The footprints leading to the summer house were fainter now, washed by the rain, but still visible. She tried the silver key again, but it did not fit. Another lock, she thought, but where? As she turned to leave, she noticed a glint. In the grass, a small brass button, engraved with a crest that matched the Harrow family's. Someone was here, she thought, and in haste. Dinner that evening was a strained affair, the weight of the letters and Lily's absence pressing on the group. Evelyn maintained her composure, but her smiles were brittle, and Clara's silence was palpable. Felix's charm was forced, his anecdotes falling flat, while Beatrice's barbed remarks about family secrets drew sharp looks. Dr. Price, unusually silent, ate little, his eyes fixed on his plate. Finch, emboldened by wine, speculated about the summer house, suggesting it held old love letters, or worse, until Evelyn silenced him with a glare. After dinner, Miss Marple lingered in the hall, her eyes drawn to a portrait of Clara's mother, its frame slightly askew. Adjusting it, she found another scratch on the wall, deeper than the one in her room. A pattern, she thought, of things hidden and disturbed. Later, in her room, she sat by the window, her notebook open. She wrote, "The letter to L.M. confirms a meeting before Sir Reginald's death, tied to a promise and a betrayal. The ledger's payments suggest blackmail or loyalty bought. The glove, earring, and lace point to a woman, Lily perhaps, or Clara's mother." Dr. Price heard an argument, and Evelyn's silence protects someone. The summer house and the panel are keys to the truth, and the button suggests haste. A motive. Lies at the heart of this, a crime of passion or greed, and it is not yet finished. She closed the notebook, her thoughts as sharp as the starlight outside. In St. Mary Mead, she had learned that motives, like shadows, were revealed by the angle of the light, and Merryweather Hall was proving no exception. The letter had uncovered a new layer, and Miss Marple was determined to find the truth behind it. Chapter 10. The Final Thread. The 9th morning at Merryweather Hall dawned with a quiet intensity, the sky a soft grey that seemed to hold the weight of secrets yet to be unveiled. Miss Jane Marple, whose early mornings were a sanctuary for piecing together the intricacies of human nature, sat by her window, her knitting needles still as she reviewed the tapestry of clues that had woven itself through the days. The blood-stained box, the cryptic letters, the single pearl earring, the small silver key, Lily's disappearance, the diary and blood-stained glove in the garden, Mr. Roland Finch's revelations about Sir Reginald's payments, Dr. Leonard Price's confession of a knife wound, the ledger behind the hidden panel, and the letter to L.M. All pointed to a crime buried in the past, but still casting its shadow over the present. Yet it was the motives, the hidden currents of love, fear, and greed, that held the final key. In St. Mary Mead, she mused, the smallest thread, can unravel the greatest mystery, and Merriweather Hall is no different. She dressed in a sober black dress, its severity softened by a lace collar, and tucked her reticule, now heavy with evidence, including the torn photograph, the locket inscribed with LM, the train ticket receipt, the diary, the blood-stained glove, the scrap of lace, the ledger, the letter, and the brass button under her arm. As she descended to the breakfast room, she noted the oppressive hush of the house, broken only by the distant call of a cuckoo and the soft tread of servants. The table was sparsely attended, with Mrs. Evelyn Harrow presiding, her silver hair impeccable, but her eyes shadowed by a weariness that spoke of sleepless nights. Captain Felix Warrendor was present, his charm eroded by tension, his fingers fidgeting with a spoon. Clara Dunhill, pale and silent, sat beside him, her eyes fixed on her plate, her hands clasped tightly. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, in a bold amethyst dress that seemed to challenge the morning's gloom, filled the silence with chatter about a recent art exhibition, her tone sharp and probing. Mr. Roland Finch, looking haggard, muttered about the coffee's strength, while Dr. Leonard Price, newly returned from a morning call, ate sparingly. His expression guarded. Miss Marple, taking her seat, remarked on the house's history, her voice gentle. "Such a grand place," she said. "It must hold many memories." Mrs. Harrow, did Sir Reginald ever speak of his plans for the estate's future? Evelyn's smile was tight, her fork pausing mid-air. "He was devoted to Merriweather," she replied, her tone smooth but strained. "His plans were for its preservation, as are mine." Her eyes flicked to Clara, who seemed to shrink under the scrutiny. Miss Marple turned the conversation to the summer house, her tone disarming. "That charming summer house in the garden," she said. "It seems so neglected now. Did Sir Reginald use it often for his papers, perhaps?" Evelyn's expression flickered, but she recovered quickly. "He kept it for solitude," she said. "It's been locked since his death. Too many memories." Her words were clipped, and Miss Marple noted the way Clara's hands tightened, and Felix's eyes darted to Evelyn, as if weighing her response. Felix, attempting to lighten the mood, spoke of a garden he had seen abroad, but his story faltered, and Clara's silence grew heavier. Dr. Price, unusually reticent, offered no comment, his gaze fixed on his tea. Miss Marple, sipping her tea, observed the group, her mind turning over the ledger's entries, and the letter to LM. "The truth," she thought, "is close now, but it requires a gentle hand to draw it out." After breakfast, Miss Marple requested a moment with Evelyn, suggesting they discuss the boxes' contents in private. Evelyn, though reluctant, agreed, and they retired to the library, where the velvet curtain loomed like a silent sentinel. Miss Marple, with her knack for gentle probing, began. "Those letters, Mrs. Harrow, must be troubling. They suggest a secret Sir Reginald wished to keep. Do you know who LM might be?" Evelyn's face paled, but she maintained her composure. "They're old matters," she said. "Reginald had many correspondents. I'm sure it's nothing significant." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes twinkling. "And yet," she said softly, "the ledger suggests payments to LM, substantial ones, until his death. Could it be Lily Mason, perhaps?" Evelyn's hands tightened on the arm of her chair, and for a moment Miss Marple thought she might deny it, but she said only, "Lily was a servant here briefly, years ago. I know nothing of payments." Her tone was final, but Miss Marple noted the lie in her eyes, sensing the moment was not yet right. Miss Marple excused herself, returning to the library alone. The hidden panel behind the curtain drew her attention, and she pressed it again, checking for further secrets. To her surprise, she found a small indentation in the wood, barely visible, where the silver key fit perfectly. Turning it, she heard a soft click, and the panel slid further, revealing a narrow shelf with a single item, a velvet pouch containing a second pearl earring, the mate to the one in the box. The pair, she thought, and a woman's secret. She slipped the pouch into her reticule, her mind racing. The earrings, the glove, and the lace suggested a woman central to the mystery, and Lily's connection to Ellen was now undeniable. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a pair of earrings had betrayed a hidden affair, its consequences rippling through a family. Motives, she thought, are often tangled in the heart. The afternoon brought a tense calm, with the guests scattered about the house. Clara emerged briefly, joining Felix in the conservatory, their conversation hushed but intense. Miss Marple, passing by, overheard Felix say, "You mustn't let it ruin us, Clara." Clara's reply was tearful, and Miss Marple noted the desperation. In her voice, returning to the garden, Miss Marple revisited the summer house, the brass button still in her mind. The door remained locked, but she noticed a faint scratch on the lock, as if it had been tampered with. She tried the silver key, but it did not fit. Another lock, she thought, but the answer is close. As she turned to leave, she heard a rustle in the bushes, and a figure emerged. Mrs. Dobbs, her apron soiled, her face flushed. "You're always poking about, ma'am," the housekeeper said, her tone sharp. "The garden's no place for guests." Miss Marple smiled, undaunted. "Just admiring the roses," she said. "They seem to hold many secrets, don't they?" Mrs. Dobbs's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing, turning away abruptly. That evening, Miss Marple requested a gathering in the drawing room, her demeanor mild but resolute. "There are matters," she said, "that must be addressed, for the sake of all." Evelyn, though hesitant, agreed, and the guests assembled, their faces a study in apprehension. Clara's pallor, Felix's tension, Beatrice's curiosity, Finch's unease, Dr. Price's guilt, and Evelyn's guarded composure. Miss Marple began, her voice soft but clear. "This house holds a secret, hidden behind a curtain, not just of velvet, but of lies. It began with Sir Reginald's death, which was no accident." She produced the ledger, the letter, the glove, the earrings, and the locket, laying them on the table. "These tell a story of betrayal, blackmail, and murder." She recounted the evidence, the ledger's payments to Ellen, likely Lily Mason, who had been Sir Reginald's mistress, paid to keep silent about their affair. The letters spoke of a final meeting, the glove and earrings of a woman's presence, and Dr. Price's confession of a knife wound confirmed violence. The hidden panel concealed the ledger, and the summer house, she suspected, held the final clue. Clara, sobbing, broke the silence. "It was me," she whispered. "I confronted him that night about his affair. I was angry he'd betrayed my mother, my family. I had a knife, but I didn't mean to kill him. It was an accident." Felix, his face grim, took her hand, admitting he had agreed to marry her to protect her secret and secure her inheritance. Evelyn, her composure crumbling, confessed to covering up the death, hiding the box and ledger to protect Clara. Lily, she revealed, had returned as a maid, suspecting the truth and searching for evidence. Evelyn had bribed her to leave, fearing exposure. The blood-stained glove and earrings belonged to Clara's mother, left behind in the struggle. Miss Marple nodded, her expression compassionate. "The curtain has parted," she said, "and the truth is clear. But justice must be served, for Clara's sake as much as anyone's." She urged Clara to confess to the authorities, knowing the truth would free her conscience as the police were called. The guests dispersed, their faces heavy with the weight of revelation. Miss Marple, gathering her reticule, prepared to return. To St. Mary Mead, her work done. Curtains, she thought, hide much, but the final thread always unravels. The end.